I'm sorry about this beeping noise. Yeah, hello and welcome to the inaugural Know Your System webinar, where today we are focusing on foot care. My name is James, and I'm the Diabetes Data Lead within the Diabetes Programme at NHS England. And my role is to support regions and systems to realise the benefits data can bring to improving care and outcomes for people living with diabetes in England. We're absolutely overwhelmed with the interest in the webinar, and as you can see, we're delighted to have an expert cast of speakers to talk to us today. I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves at the start of their section, but firstly, a bit of housekeeping. So if we go to the next slide, Alex. So if we can ask that you kindly keep your microphone on mute unless you're asking a question to ensure there's no background noise during presentations. Please turn your camera off during the presentation as well, just to help minimise bandwidth issues or any lagging information that's been shared. Please do take the opportunity to ask questions via the chat box. The chat will be monitored throughout the session, and we've got a dedicated Q&A time at the end. So we'd ask that any verbal questions, if you can hold on to them till then, that would be really appreciated. If you want to ask a question during the Q&A session, then please raise your hand using the raise your hand tool. And just to note, there may be questions that we need to take away and get back to you on. So we'll be collating all those questions and answers, and as part of the resources provided after the event, an FAQ document will be circulated to all delegates. If you've got any technical issues, if you can't hear us, if you can't see the slides, then please leave and join again, and hopefully that will fix it. The session is being recorded and will be shared widely. And when the recording is shared, hopefully within the next week or so, we'll also send out certificates of attendance, a PDF version of the slides, and an evaluation questionnaire that would be really grateful if you could complete and return to help us improve these sessions. The FAQ document may take a little while longer to compile, and this will be circulated as soon as possible. Okay, so why are we all here? Next slide, please, Alex. So the NDA, the National Diabetes Audit Team, have recently published an updated National Diabetes Footcare Audit, or NDFA, dashboard with improved functionality and refreshed data up to the end of March 2023. And so we felt this was a great opportunity to promote and engage the use of the dashboard and data. The aim of this webinar is to highlight the importance of foot care provision within the diabetes pathway and provide healthcare professionals and commissioners, people like yourselves, with the data and tools to identify variation, benchmark against peers, and support improvements in foot care. We appreciate that we've got we appreciate we've got a really great mix of different roles and expertise on the call. So we thank you all so much for joining. Some of you will know the data better than us. Some of you will be new to data and dashboards. So we've tried to tailor the session so it hopefully provides useful information, help and support to all. And just to say, this is the first of a series of webinars we're planning over the next 12 months or so, each focusing on a different part of the diabetes care pathway. With the next one penciled in hopefully in early spring 2024. More details will be provided on that in the new year. Okay, so just to give you a flavour of the agenda before I hand over to the speakers, Fran is kindly going to remind us why foot care is important and the cost versus benefits of having effective foot care processes in place. Bob is going to give us some of the background to the NDFA and what insight we can glean from the national data. Ella is going to touch on how we collect the data and also provide us with a demonstration video of the new shiny NDFA dashboard. Rajiv will follow Ella with a talk around how he uses the dashboard and data from where he sits in Sheffield to benchmark and to look for variation. And then Jerry will give us a whistle-stop tour of the Getting It Right First Time, or GIRFT, diabetes programme, what they do in regard to their gateway reviews and some of the tools they've developed to help support improved care in diabetes. And then finally, to finish, we've got a Q&A session at the end. Okay, so that without much further ado, I'll hand over to Fran. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Can somebody confirm that you can hear me?
Yeah.
Clearly not. You can hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
I can.
Good. Okay. Yeah, thanks. So my title was Why is Foot Care Important? But I changed it to, I'm getting some feedback as well. Okay, thank you. I changed the title to Why is Foot Care Important for People with Diabetes, because that's actually what we're here for. Next slide. Alex, have you got control or have I got control? Thank you. And these are the sort of big headline that we all hear about major amputations in people with diabetes. And whilst actually in the UK, we're relatively low in terms of world rankings for major amputations, this is still devastating for people with diabetes. And for me, it's not just that, you know, we league table well against the rest of the world, but actually this is unacceptable variation across the country. And we should all be aiming to be as low as the lowest in the country. So whilst we're low overall, there is still people and patches of the country where we could do better in terms of major amputation. And this graph, I think, is quite stark. Next slide, please, Alex. Just moving on slowly. And actually, there hasn't been a vast change since the NDFA and the National Diabetes Audit started in 2014. And Bob's going to tell you a little bit more about this shortly. There was an initial drop, but actually, well, that's great. Now we've got a fire alarm. An initial drop, but it's been pretty steady thereafter. Next slide, please. I'm going to try to ignore it. Next slide, please, Alex. But actually, whilst amputation might be relatively low compared with the other areas of the world, it's actually what patients fear most. What I fear most is another fire alarm going off in the middle of a talk. But it's actually, given everything else that people with diabetes might experience, major lower leg amputation is what they fear more. They fear that more than death, infection, or even going on dialysis. Next slide, please. Which is strange, because actually in the UK, and these data come from Scotland, they're much more likely to die after they've presented with a high-risk foot or ulcer than to have an amputation, by a factor of 9-fold. And we often forget the mortality of people with diabetic foot disease. So whilst it's relatively low world ranking, there is variation across the patch in major amputation, it is extremely anxiety provoking for people with diabetes. Next slide, please. And what we perhaps don't recognise is the comorbidities, the sort of general other serious illnesses that people with diabetic foot disease actually experience. And this may account for the mortality. They're probably not dying of their diabetic foot disease, they're dying with it. And you can see that there's been a rise over the years, and these are data from the National Diabetes Foot Audit, in people with heart failure. These are actually admissions with people with heart failure within 6 months prior to them presenting with a foot ulcer. And as you can see, that actually within 12 weeks after somebody presenting with a foot ulcer, if they've been in hospital with heart failure, almost 1 in 10 of them have died. So it's an extremely sick population that we're dealing with. Next slide. And I think what's also important is to take the economic view, and I'm hoping there's some commissioners and those that hold the purse strings on this webinar today, because this is also extremely important, and it's an opportunity for us to do things better. Next slide. And in fact, whilst we think of amputation and being in hospital as being expensive, the majority of the costs of looking after people with diabetic foot ulcers is actually in community care, in that outpatient care, dressings and community. Inpatient care does count for just over a quarter, but actually the majority of the costs are sitting in the management of ulcers in community. Next slide, please, Alex. And that overall will cost the NHS about £1 billion a year. Next, please. What I want to draw your attention to is this costing tool, which has come from the College of Podiatry. And this is a really useful thing for you to look at and play with the numbers. Next slide. And you can look at this as per ICS. Next slide. And so what they look at here, and I've pulled out Derby and Derbyshire because that happens to be where I work, are the opportunities to improve the cost in your community. So here, if you just click on one, Alex, it draws attention to the fact that the estimated cost of primary community outpatient care in our area is over 16 million. Next slide. And then just click on again, please. The total cost for inpatient care is around 13 million, giving a total cost in Derbyshire of over 29 million. And so just click on again, please, Alex. So a reduction of 10% in either the length of time it takes to heal ulcers or reduction just in 10% of admissions means that in Derbyshire, we could save nearly £3 million. And that can be reinvested in better care for people with diabetes elsewhere. So there are great opportunity costs to improve things for people with diabetes. I think that takes us to the next speaker, actually, because hopefully by looking at your data, you can then work out how to improve things for people with diabetes. Thank you.